Imagine picking up a biography of a famous historical figure, only to realize the author completely skipped over the most dramatic, defining night of their entire life. Well, welcome to this explainer, where we're going to investigate a fascinating historical mystery. We're looking at a famous missing scene at a critical moment in biblical literature. It's a text puzzle that has baffled casual readers for centuries. But once you look a little closer, it actually holds a brilliant secret about how ancient texts were constructed and what the authors were truly trying to communicate to us.
So, let's dive right into it. Why does the Gospel of John completely skip the agonized prayer in Gethsemane? If you know the story, you know the Garden of Gethsemane is one of the most agonizing, emotionally charged moments in all of ancient literature. It is the scene of profound desperation, deep sorrow, and intense psychological struggle, right before the climax of the narrative. It's absolutely central to how we traditionally understand the story. So, where on earth is it in John's account?
Here's the situation. Matthew, Mark, and Luke. These are text scholars call the Synoptic Gospels because they share a similar viewpoint and literally see together. They all detail this desperate moment of prayer. But John? He leaves it out entirely. Now, John certainly records the historical event of Jesus going to a garden across the Kidron Valley and being arrested there, but the intense human anguish, the falling to the ground, the desperate pleading with heaven, it is nowhere to be found. It is just a stunning, deafening silence.
Now, you might initially think maybe John just forgot, or perhaps he didn't have access to the same historical sources as the other writers. But this omission isn't an error. It is a massive, deliberate choice by the author. When an ancient author completely skips an event that literally everyone else considers crucial, they're usually trying to tell you something really profound about their specific angle on the story.
To really grasp this, we first need to look at the synoptics and their focus on agony and submission.
We have to establish our baseline with Matthew, Mark, and Luke to see exactly what they're doing. These three accounts present a unified, incredibly powerful theme of visceral human distress. Mark describes Jesus as deeply distressed, telling his disciples his soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Matthew shows him physically collapsing, falling to the ground, pleading in intense agony for the cup of suffering to be removed. It's raw, it's an emotional struggle, but ultimately, he submits to the Father's will.
And this sets up our core contrast perfectly. We are placing the synoptic view of a harrowing path of suffering and submission directly against John's account, which presents a voluntary, almost regal path to glory. We're looking at two entirely different theological frameworks for the exact same historical night. And honestly, this contrast is the key to unlocking the whole mystery.
Which brings us to John's Gospel, where the focus is entirely on sovereignty and glory.
If John is intentionally avoiding the agonizing prayer of submission, what exactly is he showing us instead? Well, instead of agony, we see absolute control. In John's account, Jesus is fully aware of his approaching fate. In fact, it's a deeply cinematic moment. When the armed soldiers arrive in the dark and ask for him, he simply says, "I am he," and his captors literally draw back and fall to the ground. The power dynamic completely flips. He takes complete control, protects his disciples by commanding the guards to let them go, and willingly orchestrates his own arrest.
You see, John deliberately reframes the narrative to show Jesus voluntarily accepting his suffering. He isn't some passive victim of circumstance, caught off guard in the dark by overwhelming forces. No, he is knowingly and willingly moving toward the cross, embracing it, not as a tragic defeat, but as the ultimate sovereign hour of his glory. In John's eyes, the cross is effectively a throne.
Let's look at the exact biblical text to see this in action. Exhibit A, John 18:11. Instead of asking for the cup of suffering to be removed, like he desperately does in the synoptic accounts, Jesus boldly declares, "Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?" It's a statement of absolute, unwavering authority. There is zero hesitation, no pleading for an alternative route, just absolute resolve.
Now for Exhibit B. You might be wondering, does John completely ignore Jesus' human struggle? Well, not entirely. Earlier, in chapter 12, John does acknowledge Jesus' troubled soul as he contemplates what's coming. But he immediately connects that brief anguish to a prayer for divine glory, which is instantly answered by a thunderous voice from heaven declaring, "I have glorified it and will glorify it again." That's John 12:28. The momentary suffering is completely swallowed up by a cosmic display of glory.
And finally, Exhibit C. Instead of a desperate plea in the dirt right before his arrest, John chapter 17 gives us a prayer of supreme, unshakable confidence. Jesus announces, "I have brought you glory on earth by completing the work you gave me to do." Notice the past tense there in John 17:4. He speaks with this majestic certainty that the victory is already won before the arrest in the garden even happens.
So this missing prayer isn't just an isolated incident. It's part of a much larger stylistic pattern.
When we zoom out, the stylistic choices across these texts become brilliantly obvious. The Synoptics consistently focus on the earthly, human story, presenting Jesus heavily as the Son of David or the Son of Man, really emphasizing his connection to humanity and human struggle. Meanwhile, John elevates the narrative. He views it from above, focusing on the heavenly meaning and presenting Jesus distinctly as the pre-existent Son of God. The missing Gethsemane prayer isn't a mistake at all. It fits this overarching framework flawlessly.
Which brings us to the ultimate resolution of our historical investigation, viewing these as clues, not contradictions.
What do we actually do with these glaring differences between the ancient accounts? Well, the absence of the Gethsemane agony in John's account is a profound theological message in itself. John uses silence deliberately. He intentionally removes the human agony so that absolutely nothing detracts from the image of the sovereign Son of God marching voluntarily toward his glorification.
If there is one mental model I want you to take away from this explainer, it's this. When you're reading ancient texts, differences are not inherently problems to be solved or errors to panic over. They are intentional clues. They reveal distinct authorial intent, giving us a multidimensional picture of history and showing us exactly what each specific author truly valued and wanted to communicate to their audience.
I want to leave you with this final thought to spark your curiosity. If we can learn so much from what is missing in this one single scene, what other fascinating mysteries are waiting to be uncovered in the silence of history? The next time you're reading a text, don't just pay attention to what's there, pay attention to what isn't. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and let the silence speak to you.